Chapter 14. The gloom of the Montreal afternoon brightened momentarily when Laurel called him on his cell phone. "Are you all right?" Ambler asked urgently. "I'm fine, Hal, I'm fine," she said, forcing herself to sound casual for his sake. "Everything's fine. Aunt Jill's fine, I'm fine. Her 60 mason jars filled with peach preserves are fine too. Not that you asked, and not that anybody will actually be eating them." She muffled the phone with her hand for a moment, having an exchange with someone nearby, and then said, "Aunt Jill wants to know whether you like peach preserves." Ambler tensed. "What did you tell her about you?" "Not a thing." She lowered her voice. "She assumes I'm talking to a boyfriend, a beau, as she would say. Imagine." "And you're sure you haven't noticed anything off? Anything at all?" "Nothing," she said. "Nothing," she repeated too quickly. "Tell me about this nothing," Ambler said. It really is nothing. Some guy from the oil company called a little while ago. They were updating their customer records, asking all sorts of silly little questions. Then when they got into the stuff about oil usage and the type of oil burner equipment we use, and I went and checked and saw Aunt Jill uses natural gas, not oil, and I came back to the phone, they'd hung up. Must have been some sort of mix-up." "What was the name of the company?" "The name?" She paused. They actually didn't say." Ambler felt encased in ice. He recognized the hallmarks of the approach. The innocent seeming confusion, the pleasant professional phone call, probably one of dozens they had been placing, with a voice print analyzer on the other end. It was a probe. He was silent for a few moments, not wanting to speak until he could speak calmly. "Laurel," he said, "when was this?" "Maybe 20 minutes ago." The sang-froid had left her voice. 12 layers of lacquer, 12 layers of dread. "Listen to me very carefully. You need to leave now. But you need to leave right now." He went on to give her precise instructions. She was to drive her car to a car repair shop, tell them that the steering alignment needed to be fine-tuned, and drive off with whatever loaner car they'd have for her. It was a cheap, easy way of getting a vehicle that could not readily be traced to her. Then she was to drive off somewhere, anywhere she had no connections to. She listened, repeated the odd detail. He could tell she was taking it all in, calming herself by translating the threat into a set of procedures to be implemented. "I'll do this," she said, taking a deep breath, "but I need to see you." "That won't be possible," he said, as gently as he could. "I can't do this otherwise," she said, stating a fact, not making an entreaty. She faltered. "I just can't." "I'm leaving the country tomorrow," he explained. "I'll see you tonight, then." "Laurel, I don't think that's a good idea." "I need to see you tonight," Laurel repeated with grim finality. Later that night, at a motel near Kennedy Airport, Ambler stood in his 20th floor room. He had insisted on a high north-facing floor, studying the traffic on 140th Street in Jamaica, Queens, through a scrim of bad weather. The rain was coming down in sheets, had been for an hour, flooding culverts and forming layers of slick on all the roads. Though not as cold as Montreal, it was decidedly chilly, in the lower 40s, and it felt cooler because of the damp. Laurel said she would be driving, and it was no weather to drive in. Yet his spirits leaped at the prospect of seeing her. To be truly cold was to doubt whether you would ever feel warm. Right now he felt that she was the only thing that could warm him up again. At 11 o'clock p.m., squinting through binoculars, he saw the sedan drive up, a Chevrolet Cavalier, pummeled by the downpour. Somehow he knew it was Laurel even before he caught a glimpse of her tousled auburn hair through the windshield. Now she did as he had instructed, waiting for a minute in front of the hotel, then rejoining traffic, driving until the next exit appeared, and reversing direction. From his high floor, he was able to peer at the patterns of traffic surrounding her. If she was being tailed, he should be able to tell. 10 minutes later, she returned to the hotel's concrete porte cochere. Once he called her cell phone to reassure her that she had no visible tail. She emerged from the car holding a bundle wrapped in plastic, holding it as if it were a precious thing. She knocked on his door just a few minutes after that. As soon as the door was closed, she dropped her blue nylon parka to the floor, as sodden as only supposedly waterproof garments can get, and laid her bundle on the carpet nearby. Wordlessly, she stepped toward him, into him, and they held each other close, feeling each other's beating hearts. He was clutching her the way a drowning man clutches a lifesaver. For a long moment, the two stood together, nearly stationary, holding each other tightly. Then she pressed her lips to his. He pulled back after a few moments. Laurel, all that's happened, you need to step back. You need to be careful. This isn't what you want. The words came out in a rush. She looked at him, her eyes imploring. Laurel, he said thickly, I'm not sure that He knew that trauma could produce forms of dependency, could distort perceptions, emotions. She still saw him as the man who had rescued her, could not accept that it was he who had imperiled her in the first place. He also knew that she needed desperately to be comforted, to be possessed even. He could not push her away without wounding her, and the truth was that he did not want to. Guilt mixed with aching desire washed over him, and soon the two tumbled onto the bed, two naked bodies, flexing and shuddering and flushing, and together creating the warmth each desperately craved. When their bodies finally parted, spent, out of breath, glazed with perspiration, their hands sought out each other and they interlaced fingers, as if neither could bear to be wholly separated. Not just now, not just yet. After several minutes of being quiet together, Laurel turned to him. I made a stop on the way, she whispered. She rolled from the bed, got to her feet, and retrieved the package she had arrived with. His heart quickened as he watched her naked form, silhouetted against the drawn curtains. God, she was beautiful. She removed something from a plastic bag and handed it to him. A large, heavy volume. What is it? Ambler asked. She was trying not to smile. Take a look. He switched on the bedside lamp. It was a cloth-bound yearbook, the Carlisle College logo embossed on a tan cover, and still in its original shrink wrap, now looking slightly brittle. His eyes widened. Pristine, she said, untouched, unaltered, untampered with. She handed it to him. This is your past. This is what they could never get to. Carlisle College was where she had stopped. Laurel, he whispered. He felt a surge of gratitude and of something else, as well as something even stronger. You did this for me. She looked at him hard, and there was pain in her eyes and something like love, too. I did it for us. He took the book into his hands. It was substantial, a bound volume meant to last for decades. Laurel's faith in him was evident in the fact that she had not even felt the need to open the yearbook herself. His mouth felt dry. She had found a way to punch through the lies, to expose a cunning charade for what it was. Laurel Holland, her Ariadne. Dear God, he said. There was wonder in his voice. You told me where you went to school. You told me what class you were in, and so I got to thinking. The way they'd tried to erase your past, I figured they'd done enough to put off a casual investigator, but they couldn't do more than that. You just have to look. So maybe they could have altered the computer records at the provost's. But I went to the alumni office, you see, and I bought a copy of your yearbook. The real physical object, paid $60 for it. Dear God, Ambler repeated, his heart in his throat. Now he slid open the age-stiffened shrink wrap with a fingernail and sat back, leaning against the headboard of the bed. The yearbook emitted the plastic smell of expensive printing, of ink and heavy-coated stock. He paged through, smiling as he saw images of old hijinks, the infamous pumpkin prank, the full-grown Guernsey Quinsney cow that had been led into the library, her tail flicking the card catalogs. What struck him most was how skinny most of the kids looked, as he must have. Brings back memories, huh? Laurel snuggled beside him. Ambler's heart began to pound as he continued to flip slowly through the book. There was something comforting about its very weight and solidity. He thought back to his open-faced 21-year-old visage and the quote he had run beneath his photograph, a quote from Margaret Mead that had somehow impressed him deeply at the time. He still knew the words by heart. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Ambler reached the A's of the regular face pages, and he ran a finger down the column of small rectangular black and white images, an array of bushy hair embraces. Allen, Algren, Amato, Anderson, Azaria. His smile faded. The photographs were displayed in 5 rows per page, 4 faces across. There was no question where the Harrison Ambler photo should have appeared. Nothing. Not a blank space. Not a photograph on available notice. Just the face of another student, one he vaguely remembered. Ambler felt lightheaded and a little sick. "What's wrong?" Laurel asked. When she looked where his finger rested, she too seemed stricken. "I got the wrong yearbook," she said. "I got the year wrong, didn't I? I'm so stupid." "No," Ambler husked. "The year isn't wrong. I'm wrong." He exhaled heavily, shut his eyes, and opened them again, willing himself to see something he had not seen before. Something that was not there to be seen. It couldn't be. Hurriedly, desperately, he flipped to the index. Allen, Algren, Amato, Anderson. No Ambler. He riffled through the book until he found a group photograph of the Carlisle crew team. He remembered the uniforms, he remembered the goddamn boat, the slightly beaten up Donoratico 8. That was visible in the background, yet when he searched the group shot, he was nowhere to be found. Young men in yellow Carlisle tees and shorts. His teammates were all assembled, young men with confident looks, shoulders thrown back and chests puffed up for the photographer. A team of, he counted them, 23 undergraduates. Familiar faces all. Hal Ambler was not one of them. On autopilot, he continued to page through the book, finding other group shots, teams, moments, activities, where he expected himself to appear. He was nowhere. Osiris's words returned to him. "It's Occam's razor. What's the simplest explanation? It's easier to alter the contents of your head than it is to change the whole world." Harrison Ambler was a lie, a brilliant interpolation. It was the life concocted from a lacuna, assembled from 1,000 real-world fragments and funneled into the mind of someone else. Rich feed, an artificial life supplanting an authentic one. A stream of vivid episodes presented in jumbled, constantly changing order. A slate erased and then rewritten. Ambler cradled his head in his arms, seized by terror and bewilderment, by a sense that something had been taken from him that he would never recover, his very identity. When he looked up, he saw Laurel staring at him, her own face tear-stained. "Don't give in to them," she said in a hushed voice. "Laurel," he started. "Don't do this to yourself," she said, steel in her voice. He felt himself collapsing in on himself, like some astral body crushed by its own gravity. Laurel put her arms around him, spoke in a low voice. "How's that poem go? I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? We can be nobodies together." "Laurel," he began, "I can't do this to you." "You can't do this to yourself," she replied, "because then they win." She slipped her hands around his shoulders, grabbing hold of them, as if to bring him back from whatever distant place he had drifted to. I don't know how to put this. It's a matter of instincts, right? Sometimes we know what's true even if we can't prove it. Well, let me tell you what I know is true. I look at you and I don't feel alone anymore. And I can't tell you how rare a feeling that is for me. I feel safe when I'm with you. I know you're a good man. I know it because, trust me, I know the other kind all too well. I have an ex-husband who turned my life into a living hell. I had to get a restraining order against him, which didn't do shit. Those men last night, I saw how they looked at me like a piece of meat, didn't care if I lived or died. One of them said something about having a slice of that ass as soon as I was put under. The other said he'd have a helping too. Nobody would ever know, they agreed. That's the first thing that was going to happen to me. Only they didn't count on you. But if it wasn't for me, stop it. Saying that is like saying they're not to blame, but they are. And they're going to pay too. Listen to your instincts and you'll get to what's true. What's true, he echoed. The words sounded hollow in his mouth. You're true, she said. Let's start with that. She pulled him close. I believe. You need to believe too. You need to do that for me. The warmth of her body strengthened him like armor. She was strong. God, she was strong. He had to recover his strength as well. For a long while, neither spoke. I have to go to Paris, Laurel, he finally said. Flight or pursuit? It was both a question and a challenge. I'm not sure. Burrowing in, maybe? I've got to follow the thread wherever it goes. I accept that. But, Laurel, we need to be prepared. At the end of it, maybe I find out I'm not who I think I am, that I'm someone else, someone who's a stranger to us both. You are frightening me, Laurel said quietly. Maybe you should be frightened, Ambler said. He held both her hands in his gently. Maybe we both should be. Sleep was a long time coming, and when it came, it brought unbidden images of a past he still believed to be his own. His mother's face, foundation covering the livid bruises, pain and confusion in her voice. Did Daddy tell you that? Did he say he was leaving? No, he didn't say anything. I swear the devil's in you. Why would you say such a thing? His unspoken reply, but isn't it obvious? Don't you see it too? The pain and bewilderment in his mother's face dissolved into the intense look of awe and calculation on Paul Fenton's. You're a goddamn wizard, a magician. Poof, the magician's gone, cape in one and everything. How the hell did you manage that? How indeed. Another face came into focus. First, just the eyes of comprehension and serenity. They belonged to Wai Chan Loing. Recalled a man of ancient times who set up shop in a village selling both a spear he said would penetrate anything, and a shield he claimed nothing could penetrate. He had returned to Changhua, hurtled back to the innermost recesses of his mind. Memories that had disappeared from his awareness now flooded him like a geyser from a hidden spring. He did not know why he couldn't remember before. He did not know why he could remember now. The memories seared as they returned, the pain awakening earlier memories of pain. He had witnessed carnage and, holding the gaze of the dying man, experienced none of his spiritual serenity. Instead, what possessed him was rage, a rage greater than any he had ever experienced. He and his colleagues had been manipulated. That was plain to him. The dossier, a tapestry of lies, hundreds of weak threads that became strong when woven together. You'd started to see through something you weren't meant to see through. By the day's end, the Taiwan government announced that it had taken into custody members of a left-wing radical cell, which it claimed was behind the assassination. The cell was placed on an official list of terrorist organizations. Tarquin was familiar with the so-called cell. a dozen or so superannuated graduate students who got up to little more than distributing photocopies of Maoist pamphlets from the 1950s and debating obscure doctrinal points over cups of weak green tea. For the next 4 days, as the others in his team had dispersed to be redeployed to their next assignments, Tarquin went on a controlled rampage, determined to expose the truth. The pieces of the puzzle were not difficult to locate. As he raced among the island's various power centers, Taiwan itself was reduced to a blur of pagodas, intricately painted and incised temple roofs, and densely sprawling cityscapes, cramped with markets and shops. The island was dense, most of all, with people on family-sized motorbikes and in tiny cars and buses, the betel nut chewers noisily expectorating bloody-looking spit onto the sidewalk. He met with assets in the Taiwanese military, who scarcely disguised their glee at Luang's murder. He paid a visit to the henchmen and confederates of the corrupt politicos, courtiers, and businessmen who held the true reins of power, sometimes inveigling information by means of feigned sympathy, sometimes extracting it by sheer terror and a measure of brutality he had not realized he possessed. He knew their type too well. Even when their words were carefully chosen, their faces expressed their furtive agendas plainly. Yes, he knew these people. Now they were coming to know him. On the third day, the Metropolitan Rapid Transit System took him to Pei 2. 10 miles north of central Taipei, Pei 2 was once a hot springs resort. Later, it became a seedy red light district. Now it was something in between. Past a tea house and a hostel, he found a hot springs museum, a sort of upscale bathhouse. On the 4th floor, he caught up with the chubby young man he was looking for, a nephew of a powerful general who was involved in the drug trade, helping to arrange transshipments of heroin from Burma to Thailand to Taiwan and thereupon to Tokyo, Honolulu, Los Angeles. A year earlier, the chubby young man had decided to run for a seat in Parliament, and though the playboy was better acquainted with the varieties of cognac than with the political issues of his prospective constituents, the seat had looked safe for a KMT-backed candidate. Then he learned that Luang had been in talks with another candidate for the seat. He did not take the news well. If Luang endorsed his rival, his political fortunes would be imperiled. For that matter, if Luang's anti-corruption campaign succeeded on a national level, or even inspired another government to adopt one in defensive emulation, his uncle was in danger of being destroyed. The man was lounging in steamy water up to his nipples, watching KTV, karaoke television, with a narcotized expression. He grew more alert when Tarquin walked over to him fully dressed and pulled a 6-inch titanium serrated-edged combat knife from its hytrel sheath. The nephew proved more communicative after a few incisions were made along his scalp, and blood from that highly vascular region began to drench his face. Tarquin knew the peculiar terror induced when a man was blinded by his own blood running into his eyes. It was, as Tarquin had begun to suspect, the quote-unquote intelligence in the dossier had been manufactured by Luang's political rivals, cunningly weaving enough accurate detail about other malefactors to garner a superficial plausibility. But that left a larger mystery. How did this crude disinformation find its way into the Consular Operations Intelligence Network? How had the Political Stabilization Unit been tricked into vetting this farrago of deception? No intelligence pitfall was more familiar to professionals. A man's enemies were always willing to say anything that would bring misfortune upon him. In the absence of confirmation from disinterested parties, no such claim had a claim to truth. It was almost to be expected that those threatened by a reformist political figure should seek to undermine him by spreading lies. What was not expected, what was not explicable, was the stab unit's analytic failure. The emotions he was experiencing were molten and dangerous to others, dangerous he dimly realized to himself. When Ambler awoke, he felt, if anything, even less rested than when he lay down, and it had nothing to do with the muffled roar of jet planes from the nearby airport. He felt he had come close to uncovering something of great portent. The thought hovered in his mind like morning fog and then dissipated just as quickly. His eyes were inflamed and his head pulsed, as if he were suffering a hangover, although he had had nothing to drink. Laura was already up and dressed. She was wearing khaki trousers and a softly pleated pale blue shirt. He looked at the bedside clock, reassuring himself that he remained on schedule. "You've got plenty of time. We won't miss our flight," she said, when he finally staggered to the bathroom. "Our flight? I'm going with you." "I can't let you," he said. "I don't know what the dangers are, and I can't expose you to—" "I accept that there are dangers," Laurel interjected. "That's why I need you. That's why you need me. I can help. I can watch your back. Be an extra pair of eyes." "It's out of the question, Laurel." "I'm an amateur, I get that. But that makes me the one thing they won't be looking for. Besides, you're not frightened of them. You're frightened of yourself. And that's where maybe I can make things easier, not harder." "How would I live with myself if anything were to happen to you over there?" "How would you feel if something were to happen to me here and you weren't around?" He gave her a sharp look. "I did this to you," Ambler said once more with muted horror. He did not voice the silently insistent question within him. When will it stop? Laurel spoke quietly but with steel. "Don't leave me, okay?" Ambler cupped her face with his hands. It was madness what she was proposing, but it might well save him from another form of madness. And what she said was true. On another continent, he would not be able to protect her from those who threatened her on this one. "If anything should happen to you," he began. It wasn't a sentence he had to finish. Her gaze was steady and unafraid. "I'll pick up another toothbrush at the airport," she said.